Imagine waking up paralyzed, like completely suffocating, and you are just absolutely convinced that you're under some kind of spiritual attack in the dark.
Oh, well. Yeah, just total panic.
Exactly. Total panic. You can't scream. You feel this overwhelming sense of shame and, spiritual failure.
Right.
But then imagine discovering years later that this profound, terrifying warfare was actually just your own body trying to warn you that your airway was blocked.
It's just wild.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are pulling from the core writings of D.L. Dantes, specifically the Resilient Philosopher and the Stewardship Leadership Model.
Two incredible sources.
Truly. And our mission today is really to unpack the architecture of our inner lives, how we process our own thoughts, how we self-sabotage, and ultimately how we can become better stewards of our minds and bodies.
Yeah, and that's so crucial right now.
It is. Because whether you are, say, prepping to lead a massive project at work, or you're just trying to navigate your own, day-to-day self-doubt, this deep dive is going to give you a real toolkit for rigorous self-awareness.
Absolutely. It applies to everyone.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Starting with this very strange, almost unsettling dream Dantes had. It just perfectly captures how alienated we can get from our own thoughts.
Oh, I know the exact one you're talking about.
Right. Dantes wrote about this dream where, as they put it, myself and me were talking and I wasn't invited.
Yeah, that quote is it's brilliant. It highlights a totally bizarre psychological reality.
How so?
Well, we just assume that because we occupy our own minds, we are actively participating in our internal dialogue, right?
Sure, yeah. You'd think so.
But Dante's dream points out that the loudest voices in our head are usually just conditioned reflexes. It's fear, memory, societal expectations.
Right, all the noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the actual honest inner witness that has original insight and true potential is often just sitting quietly in the corner, uninvited to the actual decision-making process.
Wow. Uninvited by your own brain.
Yeah. And that means the greatest resistance you face when trying to, grow or lead it doesn't come from your boss or the market or the economy.
It comes from you.
It comes from the part of your own psychology that basically just refuses to trust your capacity.
We act like we need permission from ourselves to actually speak up. I mean, you can spend years doing the work, right? Studying, surviving incredibly difficult professional challenges.
Gathering all that hard-earned data.
Exactly. You have real data. You have something really valuable to contribute. But then the moment comes and you just freeze.
Because there is a profound mechanical difference between being silenced by an external force and silencing yourself.
Yeah, that's a big distinction.
When the world silences you, it's loud, it's obvious. And honestly, it usually breeds a healthy rebellion. You get mad.
Right, you fight back.
But when you silence yourself, it's insidious. Because your brain actually disguises the fear as a virtue.
Wait, really? As a virtue?
Yeah, it dresses up self-sabotage as humility or patience or strategic caution, because the ego is highly protective.
It doesn't want to look bad.
Right. It knows that if you admit you are terrified of being judged, you're going to feel weak. So instead, the brain rationalizes the silence. It tells you, oh, I'm just being respectful by letting the senior people talk.
Oh, man. Or I'll wait until I have every single fact before I make a move.
Yes, exactly that.
Think about the last time you were in a high-stakes meeting. The team is debating the serious problem, and suddenly you see the solution clearly.
You know exactly what to do.
Right. But before you open your mouth, that exact rationalization script runs.
Right.
You convince yourself that waiting for a quote-unquote better time is the intelligent professional move.
When in reality, you're just terrified of the social cost of being wrong.
Yes. You are waiting for a moment of complete psychological safety that is just never going to arrive.
Never. And the root mechanism here is how the brain categorizes being wrong. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain equates social rejection with a literal threat to survival.
Right, like if the tribe kicks you out, you don't survive.
If the tribe rejects you because you made a mistake, you die. That's how the primitive brain sees it.
Yeah.
So we build entire lives around avoidance just to prevent that feeling.
But the cost of that silence is massive. I mean, it withholds your unique perspective from the ecosystem. It completely halts your intellectual growth.
And it basically ensures your potential just decays into endless hesitation.
So true. But And let me push back a bit here. How do we practically distinguish between genuine, wise caution and this fear-based self-sabotage? Because rushing in without facts isn't brave, right? It's reckless.
Well, you distinguish the two by examining your relationship with the potential of being wrong.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So, wise caution is an active state. If you are operating out of genuine caution, you're actively gathering facts, testing hypotheses, and this is key, you're setting a deadline to make a move.
You're actually preparing to speak.
Exactly. But if you are operating out of fear-based sabotage, you are completely passive. You're avoiding the move entirely just to eliminate the risk of imperfection.
Wow.
Dantes frames it beautifully, saying, if I am wrong, I learn. If I am wrong, I write. If I am wrong, I may still help somebody think deeper.
That's powerful.
Yeah, true confidence is not the belief that you'll never miss the target. It's the resilience of knowing you can take the shot, miss, survive the psychological sting of the miss, and just recalibrate with new data.
Surviving the miss. I love that because if you don't build that muscle to survive the miss, your conscious mind just keeps hiding behind that fake humility.
It absolutely does.
But this actually leads to a fascinating physiological consequence. If your conscious mind becomes an expert at, ignoring reality and avoiding conflict, your subconscious mind eventually has to go to extreme lengths to wake you up.
When a real threat is present. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Which brings us directly to Dantes' essay, Not Every Nightmare is Divine. And back to that crazy scenario I mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Yes, the sleep apnea story. What's fascinating here is that when the conscious mind suppresses the truth, the body has to bypass it completely.
It has no other choice.
Right. And historically, humans have interpreted these intense dreams and nightmares as profound spiritual messages or prophecies. We project our waking belief systems onto our sleeping biology.
Because the brain fundamentally hates a vacuum. Like, if a child is terrified of the dark, the brain won't just tolerate the empty, unknown space. It actively fills that space with, a monster in the closet.
Because a specific monster is actually easier for the brain to process than just a formless unknown. It gives the fear a shape.
Exactly. And the exact same mechanism applies to adults. The mind just borrows from your memories, your religious conditioning, your cultural anxieties, and it constructs an entire narrative to explain a physical sensation.
Yeah, so if you wake up terrified, and you were raised to view nightmares as supernatural danger, you're going to interpret a bad dream as a spiritual failure. You'll think you are literally losing a battle with demons.
And this is where Dantes' personal anecdote shifts the whole paradigm. They had these recurring horrific dreams of fighting demons, being choked, trying to call out for help, but literally being unable to speak.
Just terrifying.
And they woke up overwhelmed with shame, assuming their spiritual life was just collapsing. But then, years later, a doctor diagnoses them with severe sleep apnea.
Yeah. The dream wasn't a prophecy. It wasn't a demon. It was a brutal biological reality.
The airway was collapsing.
Right. The oxygen levels were dropping, and the body was entering a state of mortal panic. And because the conscious mind was offline, the body couldn't just tap Dantes on the shoulder and say, hey, excuse me, we need more oxygen.
So it hijacked the narrative?
It used the only vocabulary it had available during REM sleep. Sheer panic, extreme pressure, and larger-than-life terrifying images, just to force an adrenaline spike big enough to wake the host up.
So what does this all mean for how we handle modern stress? Because the implications there are huge. Think about, extreme burnout.
Oh, absolutely.
People push their bodies to the absolute brink, right? 60-hour work weeks, chronic sleep deprivation, endless cortisol spikes. We completely ignore the physical toll of our lifestyles.
We wear it like a badge of honor.
Right. So maybe our modern anxieties, those sudden panic attacks or deep depressive episodes, are just the new demons our brains invent.
That is spot on. Our subconscious has to invent a psychological crisis because we refuse to listen to the practical physical distress of the body.
We just ignore the alarms.
And that is the precise danger of romanticizing our suffering. When we over-spiritualize a nightmare or treat burnout as a virtue, we miss the vital biological alarm.
Yeah, we miss the whole point.
Dantes argues that a dream or a panic attack is rarely predicting your future. It's fiercely exposing your present. By refusing to listen to the body, we turn very real, mechanically solvable suffering into superstition.
You delay getting the CPAP machine or the therapy or just the rest you actually need because you're too busy fighting ghosts.
Exactly. You're fighting ghosts while your body is just asking for oxygen.
So this sleep apnea revelation, it really proves something fundamental. We are not a single unified voice. We're a biological hierarchy of competing needs.
Yeah, the body literally had to override the conscious mind just to survive.
Right. And if your internal biology operates as this team of competing layers, memory, instinct, intention, respiration, it completely redefines how we should approach leading external teams.
Which is the core of Dante's stewardship leadership model.
Exactly. Let's get into that.
Well, the language we use, like when we say me, I, and myself, already acknowledges that the self is a conversation. You experience internal conflict because you are layered.
It's not just one you.
Right. Imagine if your leg decided it had its own separate will, and it just refused to walk unless it got an immediate rush of blood first, ignoring the rest of the body.
The whole system would collapse.
The human body only survives through incredibly sophisticated coordinated function. And Dantes applies this biological reality directly to organizational behavior.
It's such a great metaphor.
It is. Because leadership is heavily misunderstood as this position of dictatorial control. But a steward's job is not to dominate a system. It's to protect its interconnectedness.
Which means self-governance has to come first. If you can't steward the competing layers of your own mind, your physical body, and your habits, you're inevitably going to project that internal disorder into any group you lead.
Exactly. If your internal alarm systems are broken, you won't be able to read the alarms of your team.
It's like a sports team. Bad self-stewardship is like a star player who just refuses to pass the ball.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
They score a bunch of points, but the team loses the season.
But let me challenge you on this. If self-governance is so crucial, why does modern corporate culture so often reward people with terrible self-governance?
Because they produce short-term numbers. Exactly. You see these hyper-performing sales directors or erratic CEOs, and they produce incredible short-term excellence. They're like the hyperactive organ in the body.
Yeah, but to hit those numbers, they are throwing tantrums, burning out their staff, destroying communication.
They are literally cannibalizing the surrounding tissues of their own host. So why does the business world promote this kind of autoimmune disease?
Because corporate culture frequently optimizes for quarterly metrics over long-term biological survival. When an organization rewards that erratic, hyper-producing individual, it's basically choosing isolated excellence over coordinated function.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
It's unsustainable. The mechanism of failure here is highly predictable. The surrounding system begins to break down just to accommodate the toxic organ.
Trust evaporates.
Trust evaporates, communication silos form, and eventually the strongest parts of the company fail because the environment is totally toxic.
So a steward doesn't do that.
Right, stewardship isn't about making parts obey through fear. It's about engineering an environment where trust allows the whole system to flourish. The autoimmune leader might win the quarter, but the steward ensures the company survives the decade.
That is so well put. You cannot outrun a failing biological system forever, whether it's your own heart or, a Fortune 500 company.
No, you really can't.
But this highly practical, almost clinical view of ourselves raises a massive tension in Dante's work. We've established that we need to be ruthless stewards of our biology. We need to diagnose the sleep apnea instead of fighting the demon.
Yes.
But if human life is just biology, interconnected mechanics, and practical data, what happens to meaning? Do scientific facts just bulldoze the beautiful symbolic narratives of our lives?
Yeah, so if we connect this to the bigger picture, we culturally frame science and spirituality as a zero-sum game.
Like they have to destroy each other.
Exactly. If a scientific mechanism explains a phenomenon, we tend to dismiss the accompanying symbol as primitive or childish. And conversely, if a symbol holds deep emotional meaning for us, we stubbornly reject any scientific evidence that challenges its literal truth.
It's one or the other.
Right. But Dantes offers this vital cognitive rule to resolve this. Facts correct belief, but symbols preserve meaning.
Facts correct belief, but symbols preserve meaning. Let's break down the mechanics of that. How does that actually work in practice?
Look at the ancient Greek myth of Demeter and Persephone. Historically, humans use the story of Demeter grieving the loss of her daughter to the underworld to explain why winter happens and crops die.
It was their weather mechanism.
Exactly. Now, factually, as a meteorological mechanism, that story is completely incorrect. We now understand planetary tilt, orbits, atmospheric pressure.
The facts correct the belief.
Right. But symbolically, the story of Demeter is a perfectly true articulation of human grief, the feeling of profound, desolate loss, and the psychological hope of spring and return.
So the science doesn't destroy the symbol.
No, the science of planetary tilt doesn't destroy the symbolic meaning at all.
Yeah.
It simply removes the need to treat the myth as a literal weather report.
It changes the job description of the story. Dantes also applies this to rituals, right? Like prayer or expressing gratitude.
Yes, I've
Like praying for a harvest won't magically alter the soil chemistry if you refuse to go out and plant seeds, but the act of gratitude itself has a measurable mechanical purpose.
It really does. It regulates the nervous system.
It lowers cortisol, it centers human attention, but here's where it gets really interesting. I have to push back here because this sounds incredibly clean on paper.
Okay, I'm listening.
Intellectually stripping away the literal truth of a deeply held belief usually feels like a massive emotional betrayal to people.
It does. It leaves a void.
Right. It leaves a void. So how do you actually train your mind to accept that a comforting narrative isn't factually true without losing the psychological safety it provides?
Well, it only feels like a betrayal if you've been taught that the vessel is more important than the lesson.
Oh, vessel versus lesson.
Yes. When a narrative functions as dogma, it is incredibly brittle. Dogma demands total literal submission. It basically tells you, if this specific story isn't historically and scientifically factual, your entire moral framework is a lie.
That's a terrifying, fragile way to live.
It is. And Dantes is advocating for an anti-fragile intellect. You train your mind by consciously separating the human truth from the container that carried it.
The myth, the parable, the dream.
Those are just containers. The resilience, the hope, the ethical connection, that is the lesson. Upgrading the container with new scientific evidence doesn't delete the lesson.
A symbol can beautifully guide the human heart, while rigorous evidence guides the mind.
Precisely. When we stop forcing symbols to act like science textbooks, we actually free them to do what they evolved to do, which is help us process the sheer weight of the human experience.
That requires an intense level of self-awareness. I mean, to separate the vessel from the lesson, you have to be willing to interrogate your own mind constantly.
Constantly.
Which brings us to the final mechanism Dantes explores. How do we test our reality? How do we know if we are actually learning the lesson or just getting lucky?
Oh, this is so important.
Dantes argues it requires the discipline to question everything. But most importantly, we have to question our victories.
Because the cliche is that failure is our greatest teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And neurologically that is true because pain is an immediate, unignorable feedback loop.
It forces you to pay attention.
Right. Pain humbles you. It forces you to analyze the specific mechanics of what went wrong. Success, however, is significantly more dangerous because it feels final.
Think about the last time you nailed a huge presentation or got a promotion or launched a successful project.
Did you sit down and aggressively ask yourself what external uncontrollable factors allowed you to win?
Or did you just quietly assume you were a genius?
Usually the latter. Success gives us this massive hit of dopamine. And dopamine encourages the brain to repeat the exact same action without evaluating the shifting variables around it.
Right. And if you don't aggressively dissect your success, you're likely to try and replicate the exact same process under slightly different market or personal conditions, fail spectacularly, and have absolutely no idea why.
Exactly. Dantes uses this amazing analogy of a flashlight in a pitch-black room to explain the cognitive danger of winning.
I love this analogy, a beam of light in a dark room. When you succeed, it's like turning on that flashlight. It cuts through the darkness, shows you a clear path forward, and gives you this immense surge of confidence because you can suddenly see exactly where to step.
It feels great. But what does the light actually do? It drastically narrows your peripheral awareness.
You become hyper-focused.
You become so hyper-focused on the illuminated path that you go completely blind to whatever risks or changing environments are hiding in the shadows just an inch outside the beam.
The success proves what worked inside that specific, narrow beam of circumstances. It completely hides what you are failing to notice.
Yes. So questioning your success is the deliberate act of widening the beam. Questioning isn't a sign of paranoia or, lack of faith in yourself. It is the fundamental mechanism of all growth.
You must have the courage to interrogate your methods even when the outcome is perfect. Because if you don't build the analytical muscles to understand why things work during the good times,
the first unexpected failure will completely devastate you.
we hear the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it all the time in business.
Well, all the time.
But that is exactly the trap. If you wait until it breaks, it's too late. But how do we build a habit of interrogating our wins without becoming, endlessly cynical? I mean, you still have to be able to pop a bottle of champagne and actually enjoy the fact that you accomplished something difficult, right?
Of course. You absolutely celebrate the achievement, but you do not worship the outcome.
Celebrate the achievement, don't worship the outcome.
Exactly. The discipline is simply scheduling the follow-up questions after the champagne is empty. You sit down with the team, or just with yourself, and ask, why did this actually work? What external factors were present that we didn't control? What glaring weaknesses did our strategy have that just happened to not get tested this time around?
That's so practical.
Learning from failure reveals what hurt you. Interrogating success reveals what you're still failing to notice. It's the ultimate act of self-stewardship.
So, bringing this all together, you are the steward of your own life.
You are.
When you stop silencing your inner witness out of the fear of being wrong, when you start listening to the physical, biological alarms of your body instead of inventing demons in the dark,
Right.
and when you let hard evidence correct your beliefs while allowing symbols to preserve your meaning, you build an architecture for a remarkably resilient life.
That's the resilient philosopher right there.
You do not have to wait for an invitation to join the conversation in your own mind. Speak up. Take the shot. Survive the miss.
Beautifully said.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Dantes lays out this incredible roadmap for rigorous self-awareness and waking up our inner witness.
Right.
But think about the mechanics of time and growth. As you learn new facts, as you survive those painful failures, and as you constantly adapt your beliefs to new scientific evidence, does your inner witness change its identity?
Oh, wow.
As you leave behind the old vessels and the old versions of yourself, how do you know which version of you is actually the one doing the talking?
Just keep questioning.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.